I've designed a brand new concept for making a workbench based on a traditional English joiner's workbench. It's a design that complements hand tool woodworking, but one that can be made by machine woodworkers with an interest in developing their hand woodworking skills. I wanted a quick-to-make solution resulting in the same rock-solid workbench you get from one with solid wood, but one made entirely of plywood and using only one machine. I start by using my local lumber supplier to cut the plywood into panel sizes that I figured out in advance that will both fit my trailer and be easy to manage on my own. In this design, the joinery is created by leaving precise gaps in the assembled plywood as the layers are pieced together. This creates very strong mortise and tenon joints similar to those used in traditional workbench builds, but without needing to actually cut the mortise and tenons at all. The workbench is made by layering the pieces of plywood into the larger cross sections. Using this method allows the workbench, including legs, rails, aprons, bench top and so on, to be made entirely out of plywood. Because I'm a hand tool woodworker, I decided to use a few hand tools too. I use these to increase my accuracy, to ensure clean outcuts, and also where the bandsaw is limited in cutting the wider sections. That said, most of these are actually optional, and if you don't have many hand tools, you'll still be able to follow along. With the panels of plywood sized by the lumber merchant, I carefully figure out how I can make the most efficient use of my material. I label my pieces and make sure I have all the pieces I need. Then I get my work area tidy and ready for ripping the plywood into smaller pieces on the bandsaw. But first I have a couple of cuts that are too wide for my bandsaw that I need to make using a handsaw. I have a tip for you when you cut across the grain of plywood that will help to prevent the fuzzy edges on the outcut. So I've got this mapped out at 34 1/8 for each end. So I'm using the machine edges all the time to give me the reference faces I need for the initial cuts on the bandsaw when I get to those. 34 1/8 from that end, 34 1/8 from this end, because I had my panel cut by machine. So it may vary on yours. I'm just saying that because you may be a different size, your bench height may be different, that kind of thing. So I'm cutting through that first level, and then I'm going to square over to the other side, because this becomes more important, especially when you're working with plywood. The more accurate you are with your cuts, the less planing you'll have to do after, because planing in plywood is not a pleasant experience. It does work fine, but it's not as pleasing as planing raw wood. So I'm transferring this. So there's my knife cut, my original knife cut here going across, squared across to there, and I've squared it onto this corner so it's exact, because it's so important, this kind of exactness. This gives me a chance to catch my breath again as well. So there are my knife nicks, my straight edge, and there's going to be one. I'm going to cut one of these close to the knife wall, and the other one will leave a little bit more on, which I'll plane down to size after. So this, when I cut through from either side here, cutting down here, I'm trimming my straight edge there a little bit. This means that these fibres are separated from each side, so when I cut through I get this non-ragged, non-jagged edge. So I'm going to saw here about 1 millimetre from my line. get near to your through cut, start squeezing this here. I've got my leg against it here, supporting it. That's it. And I've got another one to do that's exactly the same. And that means I've got all my panels ready to start ripping on the bandsaw. Now that I've got my main panels ripped and cut to size, that doesn't mean I've finished with the ripping or the cutting. It simply means that I've got them to a size where I can put them on the bandsaw and I can start all the ripping down the lengths to get the legs, to get the rails, to get the sections for the top of the bench, the aprons and all of those things. But it also means that I am conscious of safety, because sometimes a panel can be so unwieldy. If you're on your own in your garage, in your den, wherever you're cutting all your plywood up, you want to be concerned about safety first. I've got my outriggers at the back of my bandsaw ready to catch the plywood as it comes off there. But I've got some panels that are 2 feet wide that or round about 2 feet wide, that may be just too heavy for me. So I might do a rip cut at 9 inches so I can get 3 3-inch pieces out of that piece. So you may decide to do things like that. So start bringing your panels down to a size that you can handle, and I think you'll find it a much more rewarding experience. This isn't about the speed of manufacturing this workbench. This is about you enjoying the process just as much as you will, and the memory that you'll get from it as you will from using the bench throughout the rest of your life. So that's where I'm going next. I've got my safety helmet on, which is a visor with an extraction in there. It's cleaning my air while I'm working. I'm fanatical about keeping the air clean. I've got an extractor on my bandsaw, and everything is hooked up and ready to go. So I've worked out the safety features for myself, and I'm trying to be concerned about your safety too, but there are things in your workshop that are not in my shop, and you have to work out your own safety strategy before you go into it. Give yourself a safety protocol before you get started, and I think you'll end up with an enjoyable experience. I'm going to rip down one piece. That's the piece that I have a straight edge on. Then I'm going to probably plane one edge, that edge that's off the bandsaw, and then pass it through again and keep planing every alternate edge, so that when I get to the end of this, I've got one clean edge on all of the plywood. Those will be registration faces. And if I don't do that, it means I've got a rough edge on both sides, which may be harder for me to clean up or to register when I'm clamping, things like that. So I want to make sure that I've done that. I'm going to be bringing my Black & Decker workmate in. That's going to help me to do the planing, because remember, I'm working without a bench, so I need something to hold the wood while I'm planing, those kind of things. And I think that's going to be it for now. I think we're going to get on with putting this through the bandsaw and starting on the process. Instead of cutting the long panels, I'm going to cut some short ones, get the shortcuts first, or some of the shortcuts first, just to get my mind in line, my body in line, make sure I'm on the right page with everything, that I feel comfortable with it. So that's my next stage. So here we go. I'm not really wanting to take very much off here, so I just wanted to get down to this crisp, clean edge. That gives me the registration face for the fence. These are my leg pieces. So I've got a shallow set on my plane. I'll just go until I get a clean cut. With using plywood, you may need to sharpen your plane up more because plywood is hard on the cutting edge. So that's going to be a repetitive process. We're going to do that after every cut. So I'm just doing the 4 pieces at once. Rip, plane, rip, plane, rip, plane. That's going to be the same for the legs, the rails, and it'll be the same for the bench top too. This is getting more and more exciting for me because now I'm starting to assemble the parts. I've got all the long rips done. I have some cross-cutting to do for the rails and the legs, but my bench top section is going to be the next part that I focus on. I want to glue this together, get it into a solid mass because I can use this to support all the subsequent work that I have to do. So I want to do that now. I've got my pieces cut. I've got them in position here. It already looks like a bench top. So I have to glue these together. Now, if you want to, you can just glue them just like you would a laminated top, and that will be perfectly adequate. What I want to do is screw mine together as well as glue them because it will give me an instant top without having to wait very long for anything. So I like the idea of screwing this together. It reduces the need for clamps. So what I did is I marked out my pieces. So each time I run holes in here and run the screws, I've not got one going into the previous section that I screwed. So I've offset the holes, or the positions of the holes, by ½ an inch. So I've got, this one starts 1 inch from the end and 1 inch from the end here. And then I split the difference between them to get the middle one, split that again to get this one, and split it again to get these here. So, and then with the next one, I just shunted everything over ½ an inch, and that gave me an offset that I think is going to be great. Now, you may want to not use the screws, and the reason you might not want to is because you might want to use a dogging system or bore holes in the top for some other way of fixing. So you may not want to use the screws, but I think now I know the position of my holes. I know where I could, if I ever wanted to drill, I've got that position. So I'm using a decent quality PVA. I want something that can be used externally. That's what this is. You can use it internally or externally. And it's a glue that I have used for a long time. So I think that's important for you because the plywood is a decent quality. So I want the glue to be at the same level as the plywood glue. So I want that really solid. The first piece here, and these pieces go in here. The first one is not going to be screwed. We're not going to put any, we're just going to glue this on because we don't want screws on the external faces of what we're making. So what I do now is set this aside just for a minute, and every time I pick one of these up, I pick an alternate one of these. So I'm going to drill through the first one like this, and I'm going to use this as my template for all the holes that I'm going to drill. So I'm drilling a suitably sized hole. In this case, I'm using a 3/16 hole because I'm using a screw that's commensurate to that size. So first of all, I'm going to drill through here. That's through the first one. So that I've gone one on either side. This is 5/8 of an inch in from the outside edges. And this one is dead center between top and bottom. It's not scientific, you don't have to be dead on, just close to. Once you've done those on both pieces, you're ready to drill all of the other pieces alternately. And you won't need to countersink the screw heads because they're small screws and they will sink themselves just nicely into the surface. So there's my next one, it's mapped out. I'm going to drill this one as well, just the same way but with the offset holes. Once this is done, I'm ready to start gluing up. But I'm going to do all of the pieces alternately, just like this, and stack them in their relative groups. Those are my template pieces. So I can use those now to drill all the other pieces. So I'm going to drill them alternately by putting them together, drilling through, and that will take me about 10 minutes or so, I think. Set that one aside and have that as a face piece because it's got a good face on it. I'm just paring off the spelching that's come from the drill passing through. So I've done that on each one. And what I've also done is I have set these alternately so that they are staggered, so I know exactly where they are. One more. I was probably a little heavy-handed with my drilling, which is but it's not going to affect anything. It's actually typical for plywood drilling through it, really. But these would hold off the screws, off the bedding really, between the glue, so I want to make sure I've got rid of them. Plywood is notorious for splinters too. I don't know if you've noticed, but I've been putting that edge that I planed originally, when I planed each edge, I've put those down so that they're all on the same face. So underneath here, they will form either the top side or the underside, but they will be registration faces that will help me to make sure at least one face is perfectly aligned. This last one is my my finished piece. This is the one, can you see on this? This has got like a jigsaw piece here. On a sheet of plywood, usually you get what they call a finish face, which doesn't usually have these in. And these are patched over to of a knot or a void in there. So they stick those in. It's a stamped in thing. So before the plywood goes together, this last piece is where they inset a piece. This side is not clear. See here, I have a little bit here. So I'm going to put that at the bottom. I'm thinking this through. So this one also, so they didn't have a good face on both faces, on a single face. It had it on a poor face on both of them. So I'm putting this in place here. That's going to be my last piece to glue in place. And that one will be glued on, so there won't be any screws visible in that one. So I start here now. So I'm actually, I think I'm ready to glue up. So let me get rid of some of this dross here. I don't want this in the glue when I roll my glue out. I'm just using a sponge roller with no nap. It's just solid sponge. And this next bit should go very quickly for you. I'm going to start driving the screws. Doesn't matter which way you go. And it's surprising how much glue. It takes about 1/4 gallon of glue to make this bench, if I remember rightly. So there it is. So I'm going to start here. I'm going to drop this on top of this one and then work along from there. This is a good outside face. It's actually better than the one I chose. It's got two good faces. So let me bring these in as they are. Got my screws at the ready. Takes a lot of screws. I've not counted it. I've got my driver at the ready. So whichever one you want to glue is up to you. This is very repetitive. This whole bench is very repetitive. So we're going to go along here with sufficient glue to make sure it's covered. And the screws will be the clamps in this case. But you can also add clamps after you've got this rolled out and screwed together. You can still add clamps afterwards if you feel like you want to. But I think I've got my screws placed sufficiently to close off any and all gaps. So nice and even. Flip over. Make sure you get that registration face against the same registration face underneath. I'm going to start at one end here so I can flush this up. And I've got these dead to length. So the underside is more important than the top side. Drive that first screw. That's perfect. maybe you can work along. So I'm flush on the underside here, so I drive this one. Make sure it's seated. You don't want this sticking out because it will hold the plywood off the next piece. And just work along, leveling the bottom edge, or the planed edge, as you go. And when you finish this, especially if you flush the ends and get the bottom right, you should end up with a fairly, well, it will be straight, not twisted. This should be exciting for you when you get to this stage. So I'm tweaking this as I go to make sure I'm level. And even if it's slightly off, have a hammer ready just to tap it against the opposite piece. So I've got screws that are shy of the other side. They're 30mm screws. Next one. So this is going on here, flip over, roll out, and we repeat that all the way through until we get to the opposite side. Just about out of charge. But I did drive a lot of screws. Now that's done, I actually realised towards the last one that I only need one good edge. I didn't need two, so I drilled an extra piece. So I've got my good edge on this edge here. And it's looking very nice. I'm eyeballing from one side to the other, and I've got no twist. So there it is. And what I've really created is a stage for what I do next. So it's very simple, a little bit tedious. I do feel an ache in my neck and my shoulders, because that's a lot of drill driving there. But I know you'll enjoy the process, because look what you end up with.